My phone buzzed while I stood in the grocery checkout line, balancing a loaf of bread against my hip and clutching a carton of eggs. I glanced at the screen, expecting a work email or maybe a reminder about an upcoming appointment. Instead, I saw a text from Mrs. Brennan, our neighbor of 15 years. "Congrats on the house sale page. Bittersweet, I'm sure." My stomach dropped. I blinked at the message, reading it 3 times before my brain could process the words. House sale. What house sale? Before I could respond, another message appeared. This one contained a link. My fingers trembled as I tapped it, watching the page load with agonizing slowness. Photos appeared one by one on my screen. The living room where I'd spent every Christmas morning for 24 years. Fresh cream-colored paint covered walls that had been pale yellow since my childhood. Furniture I didn't recognize sat where our old couch had been. Modern staging, professional photography, and at the top of the listing in bold letters. Sold. My childhood home. And nobody had told me. The cashier asked for my payment, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at my phone as the world tilted sideways. The air left my lungs in a rush that felt almost violent. My chest tightened so quickly and completely that I genuinely thought I might faint right there between the candy bar display and celebrity gossip magazines. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. The eggs slipped from my grip, cracking against the floor in a spreading pool of clear liquid and yellow yolks. "Miss, are you okay?" The cashier's voice sounded distant, muffled, like I was underwater. I nodded automatically, even though I absolutely wasn't okay. My hands shook as I scrolled through the listing again, searching for details that would make this make sense somehow. List date: 6 weeks ago. Close date: yesterday. Realtor: Anderson Properties. Final sale price: $475,000. Everything was real. Every detail was documented and official and already completed. The house I'd grown up in, the house I'd poured 3 years of my life into maintaining and improving, the house my parents had promised would always be mine too. It had been sold without a single word to me. I managed to mumble an apology to the cashier, left cash on the counter without waiting for change, and stumbled toward the exit. Behind me, someone was cleaning up broken eggs. Barely noticed. My name is Paige Hollister, and until that moment in the grocery store, I'd believed I understood my place in my family. I'm the eldest daughter, 27 years old, the dependable one who'd always done the right thing. After graduating from community college with a degree in accounting, I'd moved back home temporarily to help my parents when their financial situation got difficult. Dad had lost his manufacturing job during company downsizing. Mom's part-time work at the library didn't cover their mortgage and bills. They'd asked for help, and I'd provided it without hesitation because that's what family did. That temporary arrangement had stretched into 3 years. 3 years of paying a significant portion of household expenses. 3 years of handling repairs they couldn't afford. 3 years of staying in my childhood bedroom instead of building my own independent life because my parents needed me. I'd fixed the leaking roof when they couldn't afford a contractor. I'd paid for the new furnace when theirs died in January. I'd covered property taxes twice when Dad's unemployment benefits ran out. I'd sacrificed career opportunities in other cities, relationships that couldn't survive my living situation, and my own dreams of independence. All because I'd believed their promise. This house will always be yours too. I waited for my phone to ring. Surely they'd call now. Surely they'd explain, apologize, tell me there'd been some terrible miscommunication. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, phone clutched in my hand, willing it to buzz with their names on the screen. Minutes crawled past. 5, 10, 20. Nothing. I checked my call log to make sure my phone was working properly. I verified my volume was turned up. I even called my own voicemail to confirm service. Everything functioned perfectly. They just weren't calling. An hour passed. The phone stayed silent. They'd sold the house. Our house, the house they'd raised me in, the house I'd invested thousands of dollars and countless hours into preserving, and they still hadn't told me themselves. I'd learned about it from a neighbor's congratulatory text and a real estate listing website. The silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. They'd chosen not to tell me, had actively hidden the sale from me, had closed the deal and walked away without a word. That realization settled over me like cold water, shocking and clarifying. This wasn't oversight. This was intentional exclusion. And that changed everything about what came next. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. 5 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table that had hosted every family meal of my childhood. Dad across from me, coffee cup warming his hands. His expression serious but kind. "Paige, I want you to know something," he'd said. "This house will always be yours too. Your mom and I built our life here, but you grew up here. It's as much yours as it is ours. When we're gone, it'll be yours completely. But even now, it's your home." I'd believed him completely. Those words had shaped major life decisions. When I'd been offered a better job in Seattle 2 years ago, I turned it down because leaving felt like abandoning family and home. When my boyfriend had asked me to move in with him across town, I declined because this house was my anchor, my future, my security. I'd invested more than money into this property. I'd invested faith, trust, my sense of belonging and future stability. Every repair I'd made, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd accepted, all of it had been built on the foundation of Dad's promise. "This house will always be yours too." Those words had cost me years of my life. And apparently they'd meant absolutely nothing. I drove straight to their new apartment. They'd moved out 3 weeks ago, telling me they'd found a rental closer to Mom's work, something easier to maintain in their retirement years. That had made sense at the time. The house was large for just 2 people, required constant upkeep, came with property taxes and maintenance expenses. A smaller apartment seemed practical. I hadn't questioned it. Hadn't suspected. I should have. The apartment complex was modest but nice, located 15 minutes from where I now lived alone in a cramped studio. I parked and sat for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart and organize my thoughts. Then I walked to their second-floor unit and knocked. Mom opened the door wearing casual clothes and a welcoming smile that froze instantly when she saw my face. I watched recognition dawn in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but awareness. She knew I knew. "Oh," she said, her voice small. Just that one syllable, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. "You weren't supposed to find out like that." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let me explain." Just a quiet acknowledgement that I'd discovered their secret in the wrong way, as if the method of discovery was the problem rather than the secret itself. They didn't apologize. That became clear within the first 5 minutes. Dad appeared behind Mom, his expression defensive before I'd even spoken. They ushered me inside, and we sat in their new living room surrounded by furniture from the house. My house, arranged in this unfamiliar space. Then they explained. They'd needed freedom, they said. Needed to downsize, to simplify, to start fresh in their retirement. The house had been their asset, their investment, their decision to make. I'd contributed to expenses, yes, but that was just helping with bills. That didn't give me ownership or say in their choices. "We raised you in that house," Dad said, his tone suggesting I should be grateful rather than angry. "We provided for you for 18 years. Helping with some expenses recently doesn't entitle you to our property decisions." Mom nodded along, adding, "You'll understand when you're older, when you have your own investments to protect." I sat quietly on their couch, listening to them rewrite history and minimize my contributions. Inside, something fundamental was hardening, crystallizing into cold clarity. They'd betrayed me. They'd lied to me. And now they were trying to gaslight me into believing I was unreasonable for feeling hurt. I let them talk. I didn't argue or defend myself. I just listened and remembered every word. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. "Why didn't you tell me?" The room went quiet. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at his hands. Neither of them wanted to answer. "We knew you'd be upset," Mom finally said. "We didn't want drama during the sale process. You would have made it complicated, Dad added, his tone almost dismissive. Then he laughed. Actually laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound that tried to minimize the enormity of what they'd done. You know how you get about family stuff. Too emotional, too attached. It was easier this way. That laugh, casual, dismissive, cruel, cut deeper than anything else they'd said. In that sound I heard the truth. This wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. This was intentional. They'd hidden the sale from me deliberately because my feelings, my contributions, my years of sacrifice, none of it mattered enough to warrant inclusion in their decision. I'd been deliberately excluded from something that affected my life profoundly because including me would have been inconvenient for them. That laugh crystallized my resolve. I stood, told them I needed to go, and left without another word. They looked relieved that I wasn't making a scene. They had no idea what was actually coming. I drove home to my small studio apartment and immediately pulled out an old filing box I'd kept in my closet. Years of paperwork, organized by year and category out of professional habit. Tax receipts showing my contributions to household expenses. Contractor invoices for repairs I'd paid for. Home Depot receipts for materials I'd purchased. Bank statements showing regular transfers to my parents' account. Thousands of dollars, meticulously documented. I sorted through everything, building a timeline of my financial investment in that house. The roof repair, $4,800. The furnace replacement, $6,200. Property taxes, twice, $7,400 total. Regular monthly contributions to mortgage and utilities, roughly $800 per month for 3 years, totaling $28,800. Plus countless smaller expenses, paint, fixtures, lawn care equipment, appliance repairs. My conservative estimate put my total financial contribution somewhere around $55,000 over 3 years. Then I found a document I'd almost forgotten about. A thick envelope, official and legal looking, from the refinancing they'd done 4 years ago. I pulled out the papers and started reading carefully. That's when I saw it. Name. Right there, on the second page, in the list of parties with legal interest in the property. My hands trembled as I read the document more carefully, my accounting training kicking in to interpret the legal language. 4 years ago, when my parents had refinanced their mortgage to get better interest rates, the bank had insisted on specific terms. Because I'd been contributing substantially to household expenses and the mortgage payments, because I'd been living in the home and had demonstrable financial stake in maintaining it, the bank's underwriting department had required my inclusion in the refinancing paperwork. Not as a co-owner exactly, but as someone with legal financial interest in the property. I remembered signing these papers. My parents had presented them casually, saying it was just paperwork, that it was standard procedure, that it didn't mean anything significant. They'd assured me I wasn't taking on any debt or responsibility, just acknowledging my residence in the home. I'd signed where they'd indicated, trusting their explanation completely. I'd been 23, naive, believing family wouldn't mislead me about something so important. But according to these documents, my signature meant considerably more than they'd claimed. The refinancing agreement specifically listed me as having financial interest in the property, requiring my consent for any future sale or transfer of the title. They'd lied to me then. And now that lie was about to matter immensely. I didn't call them. I didn't confront them with this discovery. I didn't warn them about what I'd found buried in 4-year-old paperwork. Instead, I did something they'd never expect from their dependable, compliant daughter. I stayed silent. I let the sale proceed through its standard closing procedures. I let them celebrate their freedom and fresh start. I let them believe they'd successfully excluded me and gotten away with it. Because the truth I was learning worked better when it arrived on its own timeline. When it emerged through proper legal channels rather than emotional family confrontations. The documents in my filing box told a story that didn't require my voice to be heard. They spoke through signatures and dates and legal language that couldn't be argued away or minimized. I organized everything chronologically, made copies, and stored originals in a safe place. Then I waited. I went to work, lived my normal life, and prepared for the inevitable moment when their sale would hit the obstacle they'd never seen coming. The obstacle they'd created themselves 4 years ago when they'd needed my cooperation to refinance, and had hidden the true implications of my signature. Their lie was about to become my leverage. And I hadn't needed to do anything except exist. On paper, in ink, legally documented and impossible to erase. A week later, my phone rang during my lunch break. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice calm and neutral. Paige, thank God. Mom's voice was frantic, strained in a way I'd rarely heard. We have a problem with the house sale. The buyer's attorney flagged something during the title review. Something serious. They're saying there's an issue with clear title. I took a bite of my sandwich, chewing slowly before responding. What kind of issue? I don't know exactly. Something about additional parties with interest in the property. The title company is saying the sale might not be valid. That we might not have been able to sell without. She paused, and I could hear her breathing quicken. Paige, did you sign anything years ago? Anything about the house? I let the silence stretch, taking another bite, sipping my water. Paige. Mom's voice had gone shrill. This is important. The buyers are threatening to pull out. They're saying we misrepresented clear title. We could lose the sale entirely. We could be sued. Did you sign something? I might have, I said calmly, deliberately vague. I'm not sure. Why? Mom started explaining, her words tumbling over each other in panic. I listened without comment. Then, as she paused for breath, I spoke quietly. I have to get back to work. We'll talk later. I hung up before she could respond. They called 17 times over the next 2 hours. I let every call go to voicemail. I listened to the messages during my drive home, my expression neutral as their panic escalated with each recording. First Mom, explaining the situation more calmly, asking me to call back when I had a chance. Then Dad, irritated, saying they needed me to deal with this immediately. Then Mom again, crying, begging me to answer. Then Dad, angry now, demanding I pick up the phone. Their final message was both of them together, talking over each other, their voices desperate and confused and frightened. Paige, the buyers are walking away if we can't resolve this by tomorrow. Please call us. Please. We need to know what you signed. We need your help fixing this. I saved all the messages and went about my evening routine. Made dinner. Watched television. Responded to work emails. At 9 o'clock, Mom called again. This time I answered. Hi Mom. Paige. She sounded exhausted. Do you know anything about this title issue? Please honey, this is serious. We could lose everything. I know about the refinancing papers I signed 4 years ago, I replied calmly. The ones you said didn't mean anything. Is that what they're asking about? The silence that followed told me everything. Oh God, Mom whispered. That's what this is about. Paige, what exactly did those papers say? The next morning, I met with a real estate attorney named Mr. Sullivan who'd been recommended by a coworker. His office was small but professional, filled with law books and framed credentials. I presented the refinancing documents, my payment records, and the timeline of my contributions. He read through everything carefully, his expression neutral and focused. When he finished the first review, he went back and read specific sections again, his finger tracing certain paragraphs. Finally, he looked up at me with something like professional respect in his eyes. Ms. Hollister, these documents are quite clear. You're listed as having substantial financial interest in the property. The refinancing agreement specifically requires your written consent for any sale or title transfer. He tapped the papers with his pen. Your parents cannot legally complete this sale without your signature releasing your interest in the property. Any sale concluded without your consent would have defective title, which is exactly what the buyer's attorney caught during their review. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. So what does that mean practically? It means they can't close without you, he stated simply. The title company won't insure it. The buyers won't accept defective title. Your parents either need your cooperation to complete the sale, or the sale collapses entirely. He paused. It also means you have leverage to negotiate appropriate compensation for your interest. For the first time in my life, I held power in my relationship with my parents. Real power, not the kind built on guilt or obligation, but legal authority they couldn't dismiss or minimize. They'd spent years making decisions that affected me without my input, taking my contributions for granted, assuming my compliance in everything. Now, suddenly, they needed something from me they couldn't obtain any other way. And I hadn't needed to scheme or manipulate or even raise my voice. I'd simply existed on paper, in documents they'd forgotten about, in legal language that couldn't be argued with or explained away. The shift was dizzying and clarifying all at once. I left Mr. Sullivan's office with clear understanding of my position and my options. I could release my interest in exchange for appropriate compensation. I could refuse to sign and force the sale to collapse. I could negotiate terms that recognized my contributions. For the first time in 3 years, maybe in my entire life, I wasn't operating from a position of family obligation. I was operating from legal standing. That evening I didn't call my parents. I let them exist in uncertainty while I considered my next move carefully, methodically, the way I approached accounting problems at work. With logic, documentation, and absolutely no emotional confusion about what I deserved. They showed up at my apartment unannounced 2 days later. I heard the knock and checked the peephole, seeing both parents standing in the hallway. Dad's face was strained, lacking its usual confidence. Mom's eyes were red like she'd been crying. I opened the door and let them inside without a word, gesturing to my small couch. They sat close together, united by crisis in a way that might have been touching if they'd shown similar unity when including me in major decisions. "Paige, we need to talk about this title issue," Dad began, his voice carefully controlled. No laugh this time. No dismissiveness. "We've spoken with our realtor and the title company. They're saying we need your signature to release any claim on the property before the sale can proceed." "Okay," I said neutrally. "The buyers are getting impatient. They've already extended the closing date once. If we can't resolve this soon, they'll walk away." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "We need you to sign the release documents." "Why would I do that?" I asked calmly. Mom's face crumpled slightly. "Paige, please. We're your parents. We need your help." "You needed my help for 3 years," I replied quietly. "I provided it. Then you sold the house I'd invested in without telling me. So I'm asking again, why would I help you now?" The silence that followed was heavy with their realization that guilt and family obligation no longer worked on me. They tried offering money. "We could give you something from the sale proceeds," Dad suggested, his tone making it clear he considered this generous. "Maybe 10,000. That's more than fair compensation for the rent you didn't pay while living there." I didn't respond immediately, just looked at him until he shifted uncomfortably. "What's fair compensation for 3 years of supporting your household? $455,000 in documented contributions. For the opportunities one sacrificed staying home to help you." Dad's expression darkened. "That's excessive. You lived rent-free. That has value. I paid a portion of your mortgage, covered repairs, handled emergencies you couldn't afford. Living in the house wasn't a gift. It was logistics while I subsidized your life." Mom jumped in. 20,000 then. That's very generous, Paige. You have to be reasonable." 30, Dad countered like we were haggling at a garage sale. "But that's our absolute limit. Take it or leave it." I watched them negotiate against themselves, each offer revealing their desperation more clearly than any argument could. They were bargaining with me like I was a stranger, offering me crumbs from the sale of a house I'd helped them keep. Finally I spoke. "I'll think about it." Their faces registered shock. They'd expected me to either cave immediately or accept their terms. My refusal to engage on their timeline was clearly unexpected. What's there to think about? Dad demanded. We're being more than fair. 3 days later, my phone rang with news I'd been half expecting. The buyers had walked away. According to Mom's tearful call, they'd decided the title complications weren't worth the trouble. They'd found another property with cleaner paperwork and less drama. The deal had collapsed completely. Paige, this is your fault, Dad said, having grabbed the phone from Mom. Your stubbornness killed this sale. We had a buyer at a good price, and your unreasonable demands scared them off. His voice was harsh, accusatory, containing the same dismissive edge it had carried when he'd laughed about excluding me. I made no demands, I replied calmly. I simply asked for time to think. That's not unreasonable. You knew they wouldn't wait. You knew this would happen. If the sale was dependent on my immediate compliance without fair negotiation, then maybe it wasn't a very solid sale to begin with, I responded. Maybe you should have included me from the beginning instead of assuming you could force my cooperation at the last minute. Dad sputtered, searching for arguments. But the truth was simple and undeniable. They'd created this situation by selling without my knowledge. They'd compounded it by minimizing my contributions. They'd sealed their fate by trying to pressure me into accepting inadequate compensation. And now they were facing consequences that were entirely of their own making. The market, I learned later, had shifted slightly. Inventory was increasing. Buyers had more options now than they'd had 6 weeks ago when my parents had gotten their original offer. They blamed me. In family phone calls, in messages to extended relatives, in every conversation, they painted me as the unreasonable daughter who'd sabotaged their retirement plans out of spite. Cousins called asking what was going on. My aunt sent a concerned email about family unity. Uncle Dennis left a voicemail suggesting I was being selfish and should respect my parents' decisions. The smear campaign was obvious and desperate. But this time something had fundamentally changed inside me. Their blame didn't stick. It slid off like water off glass, unable to find purchase in the guilt I'd spent years cultivating. I'd learned that guilt only worked when you still believed you were wrong. When you still thought you deserved the criticism, still accepted the narrative that your needs were less important than family peace. I'd believed that for years. I'd internalized the message that being a good daughter meant sacrificing my interests for theirs, that speaking up for myself was selfish, that demanding fair treatment was making things difficult. But standing in that grocery store, learning about the sale through a neighbor's text, had shattered that conditioning completely. I wasn't wrong. They were. I wasn't being difficult. They were being dishonest. And their attempt to shame me into compliance just proved they still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. I saved all their messages, all their attempts at manipulation through family pressure, all their efforts to rewrite history and minimize their betrayal. A month later, they tried relisting the house. This time, they were honest with potential buyers about the title complication, explaining upfront that an additional signature would be required from someone with financial interest in the property. The problem emerged immediately. Every buyer's attorney who reviewed the situation reached the same conclusion. The title issue needed to be resolved before closing, not during it. My parents couldn't show clear title until I signed release documents. And I wouldn't sign without fair compensation. Most buyers walked away immediately rather than get involved in what looked like a family dispute with legal complications. Those who remained made lowball offers, assuming my parents were desperate and would accept reduced prices to escape their situation. What should have been a straightforward sale at $475,000 was now drawing offers in the low 400s, if at all. The longer the house sat on the market, the more suspicious buyers became. Why wasn't it selling? What was wrong with it? Was the family dispute hiding deeper problems? Each passing week damaged their position further. Dad called me twice during this period. Both times he was angry, accusing me of deliberately sabotaging them. You're costing us thousands of dollars every week this drags on, he said during the second call. The market's dropping. Every day you refuse to cooperate costs us money. Then maybe you should negotiate fairly, I replied calmly. 2 months after the original sale collapse, I received a formal request to meet at a lawyer's office. Not from my parents directly, but from their attorney, a professional letter requesting my presence for settlement discussions. I agreed immediately and arrived on time, dressed professionally, carrying my organized documentation. My own attorney, Mr. Sullivan, accompanied me. My parents sat across a conference table with their attorney, a woman named Ms. Pierce who looked tired and frustrated. The room felt cold, formal, stripped of any pretense that this was a family matter. This was business now, legal negotiation between parties with competing interests. Ms. Pierce began by outlining my parents' position, attempting to minimize my contributions and emphasize their ownership. Mr. Sullivan responded by presenting my documentation, bank statements, receipts, payment records, the refinancing agreement with my signature clearly visible. Then I spoke. For 20 minutes, I outlined what I'd contributed. Not emotionally or dramatically, but factually, using numbers and dates and receipts. 4 years of financial support. $55,000 in documented payments. Sacrificed opportunities, delayed career growth, abandoned relationships. Years of my life invested in their property based on promises they'd broken. I wasn't asking for the moon. I was asking for recognition of what I'd actually contributed, compensated fairly based on market value and legal standing. The negotiation lasted 3 hours. Ms. Pierce tried various arguments, that I'd lived rent-free, that family contributions weren't legally binding investments, that my parents deserved to benefit from their own property. Mr. Sullivan countered each argument methodically. I'd paid more than market rent through my contributions. Family contributions were legally binding when documented and tied to refinancing agreements. My parents couldn't benefit from property they couldn't sell due to defective title. Eventually, the reality became clear to everyone in that room. My parents had no leverage. They couldn't sell without me. They couldn't refinance without me. They couldn't clear the title without my signature. Their choices were simple. Negotiate fair compensation with me, or keep the house indefinitely while making mortgage payments they'd planned to escape. Finally, Dad spoke directly to me for the first time during the meeting. "What do you want, Paige?" His voice was defeated, exhausted, stripped of its usual authority. I'd prepared for this question. 35% of the net proceeds from any sale. In writing, paid directly to me at closing, not as a family transaction but as legal settlement. Plus recognition in writing that I contributed substantially to maintaining the property. The room went silent. 35% was significant, undeniably. But based on my documented contributions and legal position, Mr. Sullivan had advised it was not only fair but possibly conservative. They could accept my terms or continue hemorrhaging potential sale value as the house sat on the market. They signed. Not happily, not with grace, but willingly because they had absolutely no other choice. The house sold 4 months after the original deal had collapsed. The final sale price was $435,000, $40,000 less than the first offer they'd received. The market decline, the extended time on market, and the visible title complications had all contributed to the reduced value. After paying off their remaining mortgage, closing costs, and realtor fees, the net proceeds came to roughly $310,000. My 35% share was $108,500. The check arrived via certified mail directly from the title company, made out to my name only, representing my documented investment and legal interest in the property. It wasn't a gift from my parents. It wasn't family generosity or eventual fairness. It was recognition in legal and financial terms that I'd contributed substantially to something I'd been excluded from. My parents received the remaining proceeds and moved forward with whatever retirement plans they'd made. We didn't speak during the final sale process. Everything went through attorneys, signatures obtained via formal channels, money transferred through official procedures. I deposited the check, paid Mr. Sullivan's fees, and finally had the means to build the independent life I delayed for years. Not because they'd chosen to include me or had a change of heart, but because legal documents don't lie and signatures don't forget. I used the money to move forward in ways I'd postponed for years. I put a down payment on a small condominium in a better neighborhood, something that was entirely mine with my name alone on the deed. I paid off the student loans that had hung over me since community college. I invested a portion for retirement, building financial security I'd sacrificed while supporting my parents. I took the job offer from a firm in the next city, the one with better pay and career growth potential, the one I'd turned down years ago because leaving had felt like abandoning family. Now I had no family obligations keeping me tethered to a place I'd outgrown. The new city welcomed me. The new job challenged me. The new apartment felt like freedom, unmarked by history or complicated family dynamics. I decorated according to my own taste, established my own routines, built a life that belonged entirely to me without anyone else's expectations or needs shaping my decisions. No more unpaid loyalty. No more silent sacrifices. No more believing that family meant accepting unfairness without question. I'd learned the hardest way possible that love without respect was worthless, that promises meant nothing without follow-through, that protecting myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. My parents had taught me these lessons through betrayal. I'd learned them thoroughly and completely, and I'd never forget. 6 months after everything settled, I drove past the old house one final time before leaving for my new city. New owners had moved in, a young family with small children. They'd painted the exterior trim a different color, installed a playground in the backyard visible from the street. It didn't look like my childhood home anymore. It looked like someone else's fresh start, unmarked by my history. I felt nothing looking at it. No nostalgia, no longing, no sense of loss. That house wasn't mine anymore, and that was completely okay. It had never really been mine despite the promises and the years and the investment. What I'd reclaimed through those painful months of documentation and legal negotiation wasn't a building. It was something far more valuable and permanent. I'd reclaimed my worth, my right to fair treatment, my understanding that I deserved respect and recognition, not just within family but especially within family. The house was sold, the proceeds divided, the legal matters settled. But what really mattered was the transformation that had occurred inside me. I'd learned to value myself enough to demand others value me too. And this time, absolutely no one could sell that or take it away without my consent. The road ahead stretched open and clear, and I drove toward it without looking back.